Come on, baby, don't you wanna go? Come on, baby, don't you wanna go? Back to that lemon light city, sweet home Chicago. 2 is 4, 4 4 6. Come on, baby, now get your business fixed. Come on.
Hi, Avi Myers here for the Northtown Neighborhood News Magazine, a presentation of the Northtown Community Council. And this show signals the beginning of the post-election era here, in which we want to concentrate on the Y2K computer problem, not to necessarily alarm you or make you feel safe, but you know what? We just want to inform you. And we are very privileged to have as our first guest of this new almost millennium era, the city chief, if I got the title wrong, or, you know.
Yeah, sounds like you're on your way.
Okay, of the Y2K. We're talking to Beth Boatman. How are you, Beth?
Very good, thank you.
Thank you.
Tired of Y2K already, and it's only January.
So you got 11 more months to go. And by the way, don't forget Arthur C. Clarke says the real millennium starts in 2001.
And he'd be right. So does that mean I get 2 years to fix this?
Hey, why not? So tell us something. Are the airplanes going to fall out of the sky? Is the gas going to go off? Are we going to be powerless, rioting in the streets and all this other good stuff?
So far, it doesn't look that way.
Good.
Certainly, it seems like the planes are going to stay in the sky. The FAA seems to have their arms around that. I think we're getting good news about the power grid, which would certainly be the worst case scenarios if we lost power.
Yeah, let's talk about that, because really that to me is the most interesting thing, because I figure if we have water, we're talking to Terry O'Brien as our next guest, we'll find out if we can flush okay. And
You'll be able to flush.
Water, power, gas, to me, I mean, if the banks are a month behind, okay, I got my statement late.
Right. Actually, you should probably add telecommunications to that, too, because the way things work today is you can't get electricity, even if the power grid works, without the telecommunications piece that's underneath it. So you can add phones and telecommunications, too. And in general, because we're worried about those folks, too, as well as cable utilities, we meet with them regularly. Matter of fact, I was telling you earlier, we have a meeting with People's Gas on Tuesday. So we meet with them regularly to kind of get updates to make sure that they've got a good plan in place and they're on their way. And so far, we've gotten really good reports that they're not there yet, but they're close. And matter of fact, it looks as though the telecommunications seems to be just about there.
Okay, now basically, most of the information I know from Chicago, besides from Terry O'Brien, came from the Tribune, which I know you were super pleased about everything they wrote on January 1st.
Thanks for bringing that up.
Anyway, by the way, I could not, never mind. Anyway,
It's okay.
The fact of the matter is, first of all, let's talk about the power grid.
Sure.
Okay, Commonwealth, I keep wanting to call them Communist Edison, but when I get my bills, I do anyway. They basically said in the article that I think at least 8 of their 10 nuclear accelerators will be operational. Does that sound accurate, or?
Yeah, they've made lots of progress in the last few months, and it looks as though they're still on target for their July target to be done with those things.
Okay, which at least is 6 months in advance.
Right.
Now, okay, besides for that, okay, what about 2 questions about this whole electrical thing that I'm hearing from my, as I mentioned earlier off the air, I want to say hi to Roger and Yana, who have bought a 5-acre ranch in Montana and have invited me there for Y2K. And anyway, they're not from this area right now, and I know they have their concerns. But in any event, I'm just curious about the power grids being interconnected. Is that a problem?
Well, I think it's something to watch. I'm not sure it's anything that we need to be overly concerned about at this point.
Like if the power goes off in North Dakota, is that going to affect the entire nation? Or
there's a ripple, certainly, but the fact that that they ripple all the way across the country leaves us fairly safe in that unless the whole thing goes down, there seems to be enough power around to be able to do that. Now, we had that one storm last year that kind of caused us to take some pause because we did have trouble buying the electricity that we'd already put orders in for. But we are working really closely. We've got a team of folks together that's working with utilities, and actually the utilities and all the other infrastructure folks in the city. For example, we're going to be calling BOMA in, the Building Owners Management Association, because we're worried about not just our facilities that the city manages, but the ones that somebody else manages too, because some of our biggest concerns are things like spurious fire alarms, or fire alarms not going off at all.
Okay.
And then our fire department not being able to figure out where to go when. So those are some of the issues that I think now that we feel more comfortable about the power grid, those are the issues that we worry about.
What about things like embedded chips?
Yeah.
Which is something I really don't understand at all.
Yeah, those are things we worry about too.
I mean, basically, I was a history and poli-sci type journalism major, so I don't know anything about science. But
Well, I only was a comp-sci major because I wanted to meet an engineer. So then I became enlightened, but it was too late to change my major. So anyway, so now I know this stuff, unfortunately. But in terms of the embedded chips, lots of things they're pervasive. They're all over the place. Lots of things have chips. Your alarm clock at home has a chip. Your microwave has a chip. The chips that bother us or that cause us problems at year 2000 are the ones that have some kind of device in it that requires a clock. So there might be a timing device that they click on and they click off, occasionally. There could be a maintenance piece in it, so it's checking to see when's the last time I was maintained. For example, lots of fleet, big, heavy equipment especially has that kind of a chip in it. And what we're finding in general is that only about 1 to 5% of the chips tend to fail, even in the same kind of machinery. So the number's really small. Unfortunately, they're pervasive. They're in everything. So you almost have to go check every single one of them. So for example, fire trucks will start, but the ladders won't go up.
Interesting.
Right. Or ambulances will get to the site, but the defibrillator won't work. So it's the components generally that are in these kinds of specialty equipment that you have to be concerned about. And those are the things right now that we are running around, inventorying and checking with the manufacturer to make sure that they work or don't, and then figuring out what to do with them at that point.
Interesting. When I was checking things out at home already, I mean, my computer went to 2000, no problem. My VCR goes to 2008.
Yeah.
But then I thought, what about my thermostat? Because I have one of those.
Right. So do I. Yeah. In general, most consumer products are going to be okay. First of all, they're fairly new usually. Anything that's got a chip in it that you have in your home tends to be fairly new. And
now, by the way, because we bought this about 3 years ago.
I can't comment directly on your thermostat, but
and I don't know the brand either offhand. But the fact is, like, if you bought it today, would you have to worry?
Well, you don't know if you have to worry. In fact, that's a really good question to ask the manufacturer. And somebody was telling me that I work with it, they called about their smoke detector, and they had never heard the question before and couldn't answer it. So I don't know. I mean, I don't know too much about the consumer product stuff.
It was kind of interesting because in that Tribune article you mentioned defibrillators, and I was reading the USC hospitals have 8,000 devices. They'll only have 3,000 checked by then.
Right.
It's kind of interesting that on New Year's Eve most breathalyzers won't work.
Yeah. Have at it.
And the doors of the jails won't open?
Well, they either won't open or they will open. One or the two. And actually, it turns out, because we work very closely with all the sister agencies, including the Water Reclamation District, so we're kind of keeping tabs on all of that, because the mayor has a concern about how all of this works. I mean, like the CTA and things like that. And one of the things we found out about the jails is that the county really only has 2 of them are automated anyway, so the rest of them are not really things. They're crank to open the doors and stuff. So it's the 2 that we have automation and we have to worry about.
Well, I should have booked you for a whole half hour, but let me just run a couple things down quick, and you're going to be invited again.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you. People's Gas.
I don't have a status on them yet. Tuesday is our first meeting.
Okay. We'll get you back.
Okay.
And what about, now, Terry will tell us about what happens when you flush, but what about the other part? In other words, the drinking water.
The drinking water, well, that's mine to own. So what we're finding right now is most of our equipment there is some blessing in not having a lot of money to invest in new equipment, and most of it is analog, which does not mean it doesn't have a chip in it. We do have some in the filtration plant, and we have 2 pumping stations. I think that we are right now pulling all the inventory into a database, because what we're finding is some of the equipment we use, like in the water department, guess what, we also use it someplace else in the city, and that means we don't have to go check those. So we're throwing them all into the same database now because they were disparate, and we're not finding nearly as much of a worry as we were hoping. So we're not done yet. We won't be done probably the end of the first quarter, but we're getting there.
Okay, what about things like cars? Because a lot of cars have chips in them.
In general, fleet seems to be okay, like small vehicles, fleet, and again, in general, it tends to be the components inside of it. For example, the radios in the police cars, or the communication, devices that 911 and the police and fire use to communicate with each other. Our radios seem to be okay at this point. We've got documentation. So.
Yeah, a couple of things. First of all, I want to tell you one of the funniest conversations I had was somebody with the police department about their records.
Yeah.
Who told me they keep the records somewhere like over 1,000 miles away, a complete duplicate set of records, in case the bomb ever goes off.
Right.
And then his comment was, well, if the bomb goes off, then who cares? We're not alive anymore.
Yeah, that's kind of the point. But they are a police department. They're paid to be like that. They think like that.
No question.
Yeah.
But here's my thing. What about my passenger cars? I mean, do we have to worry about things like that too? Or?
I think both Ford and GM have said that you'll be okay with small fleet.
I got a Honda, I'll have to ask.